somewhere in the last 18 months, a window opened. You may not have noticed it. Most people did not. They were busy working, waiting, planning to start soon, telling themselves that next year would be the better year to make a real move. And the window kept opening. Here is what nobody is saying clearly enough. The people who built their first real wealth in the early 90s did not do it because they were smarter. The people who crossed the $1 million threshold in the mid-2000s did not do it because they worked harder than you. They did it because they were standing near an open window at the exact moment. The wind changed direction. Timing and positioning did the work that effort alone could never do. And right now, the wind is moving again. But here is the part that should stop you cold. The window has a close date, not a metaphorical one, a measurable one. Economic conditions that create first-generation wealth at scale do not stay open indefinitely. They open. They reward the people who move. Then they close. And the people who were almost ready watch from the other side of the glass. You have heard 100 versions of the right time conversation. Work hard, be patient, the opportunity will come. What you have not heard is what this audio is going to give you. The specific mechanics of why this window exists right now, why it is already narrowing, and exactly what someone in your position can do to move through it before it shuts. By the time this ends, you will not see time the same way you did 60 seconds ago. Chapter 1. The window doesn't wait for readiness. Every generation that has ever lived through a genuine economic rupture carries the same story inside it. The pattern repeats so precisely it almost feels designed. When old industries crack open and new ones surge through, a small number of ordinary people step into that gap and build something that takes the rest of their lives to spend. They are not the smartest people in the room. They are not the most connected or the most prepared. What separates them is not talent, it is timing, and the willingness to move before certainty arrives. The majority watch from the edges, waiting for proof that the opportunity is real. By the time the proof arrives, the window has already begun to close. You are living through one of those ruptures right now. This chapter is about what that means for you specifically, before the conditions change. Here is a question that will stay with you through everything that follows. Two people, same drive, same hours, same hunger. One ends up wealthy, the other ends up tired. Why? Hold that question. The answer is not what you have been told. Picture two people. Call the first one Marcus. Marcus is 28 years old and he works harder than almost anyone he knows. He wakes before sunrise. He reads about business. He saves a percentage of every paycheck with almost painful discipline. He is doing everything right, or at least everything he was told was right. But the decade Marcus is working in has already priced most of the entry points above his reach. The asset classes that would have made his grandfather wealthy in a single bull run are now controlled by institutions. The barriers are thick. His effort is real, and it earns him a decent life, a stable life, but not the kind of acceleration that changes a family's financial trajectory in one generation. Now put a second person beside him, same age, same number of hours, same willingness to sacrifice comfort for progress. Call her Diana. Diana is working in a different decade. The specific industry she stepped into is in the middle of an expansion nobody fully understands yet. The digital infrastructure under her feet is being built in real time, and the people who move during the construction phase capture the surplus. Diana is not more disciplined than Marcus. She is not more intelligent. She is working in a window. The window is open, and she walks through it. That contrast is supposed to feel unfair. It is supposed to make you uncomfortable, because the point is not that life is fair. The point is that timing inside a genuine economic window multiplies effort. Outside it, the same effort produces fractions of the result. Marcus and Diana are not a story about character. They are a story about when. Most people respond to that idea in one of two ways. Either they feel a flash of resentment, which is understandable but useless, or they lean forward. Lean forward. Call up the life you were living at that exact point 3 years earlier. Not in terms of income or savings, but in terms of what you believed was possible for you. Did you think a first-generation wealth event was something that happened to people like you? Or did you quietly file it under the category of luck that visits other people? If the answer is the second one, you are not alone, and you are not wrong to have felt that way. The financial education most people receive is built around patience, compounding, and slow accumulation. Those tools are real, but they are tools for a flat landscape. When the landscape tilts, when a genuine window opens in the economy, different tools are required. Here is what economic windows actually are. They are not secrets. They are not conspiracies. They are moments when the gap between the cost of entry into a growing sector and the potential return from that sector is still wide enough for an individual without institutional capital to walk through. These moments are created by disruption. When an industry fractures, when technology reshapes how value is created or distributed, when regulation opens or closes a channel that was previously locked, the pricing mechanisms that normally keep ordinary people out have not yet recalibrated. The institutions are still watching. The analysts are still writing reports. And during that lag, the window is open. But the lag does not last. The recalibration always comes. It comes in the form of corporate consolidation. It comes when venture capital floods a category and drives up the cost of competition. It comes when the regulatory environment catches up to what the market has already built. When it comes, the window narrows. Then it closes. The people who moved early have already taken their position. The people who waited for certainty are standing outside a locked door that looks, from the outside, identical to an open one. This is the pattern. It has repeated in some form in every era of economic disruption in recorded history. It is not mysterious, but it is almost always invisible to the people living inside it. The feeling of a genuine window and the feeling of ordinary times are not dramatically different from the inside. Both feel like uncertainty. Both carry risk. The difference is that one of them carries asymmetric upside. The other does not. You are inside a window right now. That is not a motivational claim. That is a structural observation. The specific conditions present in this economic moment, the combination of digital distribution, fractured media, decentralized finance, remote-first commerce, and the largest intergenerational transfer of consumer attention in decades. These conditions have created entry points that did not exist 10 years ago and will not exist in the same form 10 years from now. The floor is lower. The ceiling is higher. And the window is open. The villain in this story is not poverty. It is not your starting point. It is not the people who had more advantages than you. The villain is a belief. It is the belief that wealth windows are permanent. That patience always pays. That the right time will announce itself clearly when it arrives. That belief keeps capable, hard-working people standing still during the exact periods when movement would have compounded. And it keeps them moving during the flat periods when movement produces only exhaustion. Consider a man named Roy. Roy ran a small electrical supply business in a mid-sized city. He had been watching an adjacent industry grow for 4 years, reading about it, researching it, telling his wife he was almost ready to make a move. Almost ready. He needed 1 more year of savings. He needed the right partner. He needed conditions to stabilize. 3 years later, Roy had all of those things. He had the savings. He had found a partner. The conditions had stabilized. He also discovered that 2 other companies had entered the space during the window and had already secured the major distribution relationships that would have been available to him. He had not failed. He had simply arrived late. The door was not locked. It was just no longer the same door. The asymmetric upside that would have been his was gone. Roy built a good business. He never built the wealth event he had been circling. Roy's story is not a tragedy. It is a common story. And the most devastating part of it is that at every point along the way, his caution felt like wisdom. This is the mechanism you are up against. Caution does not feel like caution during a window. It feels like prudence. It feels like responsibility. It feels like the mature and measured choice. And in most circumstances, it is. The problem is that genuine windows are not most circumstances. During a genuine window, caution is a cost, measurable, real, and paid later. As this book keeps moving, you will run into an idea about preparation that runs straight against the usual belief. When that point settles, it changes how you act before you take a single step toward a financial goal. But right now, the most important thing to understand is this. The window you are in does not care about your readiness. It does not care whether you have done enough research, or whether your credit score is exactly where you want it, or whether you feel ready to call yourself someone who builds wealth. Those are internal conditions. The window is an external condition. External conditions do not pause while internal conditions catch up. The tide that lifts all boats does not ask the boats whether they are prepared to rise. Marcus and Diana are real in the sense that they represent every person who worked hard in the wrong window and every person who worked equally hard in the right one. The difference in their outcomes is not a statement about fairness. It is a statement about when. And right now for you, the when is now. So the only question that matters at the end of this chapter is the one worth carrying into the next. If the window is open, what exactly are you waiting for? Chapter 2. Preparation without timing is just practice. Most people who are not yet wealthy believe the same thing about why. They believe they are simply not ready yet. They believe more preparation will fix the gap. That belief is so widespread, so quietly accepted that almost nobody questions it. But it is wrong. Not slightly wrong structurally, completely, foundationally wrong. And the cost of holding that belief is not a minor delay. The cost is years. Sometimes it is a decade. Sometimes it is the entire window. You only realize that after the window has closed. This chapter is not here to comfort you. It is here to show you exactly what the readiness trap has already cost you, and why the version of ready you are waiting for was never going to arrive on its own. Here is the question that will thread through everything that follows. If preparation is so valuable, why do the most prepared people so rarely end up the wealthiest ones? Hold that. The answer is coming. You know, someone like David. Maybe you are David or were David or can see pieces of him in the person you were 2 years ago. David is 31 years old. He is smart, genuinely smart, not in a flattering way, but in the way that makes everyone around him say he has so much potential. He has been saying he is almost ready to start his business for 9 years. 9 years. Not 9 weeks. Not 9 months. 9 years of researching, refining, planning, waiting for one more thing to fall into place before he commits. In year 1, David needed a better understanding of the market. In year 3, he needed more savings in the bank. In year 5, he needed a cleaner business plan. In year 7, he needed the economy to stabilize. In year 9, he is 41% of the way through his working life. The plan is still sitting in a folder on his desktop. Here is what nobody tells David, and what nobody may have told you. Every time David cleared one hurdle, the next hurdle appeared. Not because life is cruel, because that is the nature of the readiness trap. The trap is self-regenerating. Solve one concern and the mind produces another. The target does not hold still. The target is designed to move, and it will keep moving for as long as David lets it set the rules. Bring to mind the life you were living at that exact point 3 years earlier. Not where you wished you were, but where you actually were. What were you waiting to know before you started? What were you waiting to have? Now ask yourself whether you have that thing today. And if you do, what is the new thing you are waiting for? Notice how seamlessly one condition replaced the other. Notice how natural it felt. That is not growth. That is the trap doing exactly what it was built to do. The readiness trap has a specific mechanism. Understanding that mechanism is what makes it possible to step out of it. Your brain is a risk management system before it is anything else. It is wired to notice incompleteness, to identify gaps between where you are and where you would need to be to feel safe proceeding. That wiring kept human beings alive for hundreds of thousands of years, but it was designed for physical danger, for situations where hesitation meant survival. It was not designed for wealth creation. When you apply a survival mechanism to a wealth window, you get paralysis dressed up as prudence. And here is where it gets precise. The brain does not experience the difference between useful preparation and endless preparation. Both feel like diligence. Both feel responsible. Both feel like the right thing to do. The only way to tell them apart is by measuring something the brain would rather not measure, the actual cost of the delay. David has not started his business in 9 years. In those 9 years, the particular market he was preparing to enter has cycled twice. The low-cost entry moment he identified in year 1 has been replaced by a high-competition, high-cost environment. His window was not permanent. He assumed it would wait. It did not wait. The painful irony is this. The preparation that was supposed to make him ready for the window actually occupied the time during which the window was most open. Preparation and timing are not the same resource. They compete for the same resource, which is time. This is the revelation that most people who are stuck never quite arrive at. They treat readiness and timing as allies moving toward the same destination. But when preparation extends past the point of functional readiness, it becomes a way of avoiding the moment of commitment. It becomes a strategy. Not a conscious one, not a cynical one, but a deeply human one. You are not lazy. You are not stupid. You are doing the thing that feels safest inside a situation that feels genuinely dangerous. The problem is that safe and profitable are rarely the same direction. A woman named Renata figured this out the hard way before she figured it out the right way. Renata had spent 8 months building what she called her foundation, reading, taking courses, talking to mentors, saving her first $2,000 to invest. She was thorough. She was careful. She was, by every internal measure she trusted, almost ready. Then she watched someone she knew put $500 into a position that Renata had been researching for 6 weeks. This woman had less knowledge than Renata, less savings, no formal preparation. Within 14 months, that position had returned 4 times its value. Renata had better information. She had more preparation. She had everything except the one thing that actually generates a result, a committed decision made inside the window. Renata sat with that for a long time. What she eventually understood was not that preparation is worthless. Preparation has real value up to a specific threshold. Below that threshold, more preparation makes you sharper. Above it, more preparation makes you slower. And in a closing window, slower is the one thing you cannot afford. The question is how you know when you have crossed the threshold. How do you know when preparation has become avoidance? Here is the signal. When the reason to wait changes faster than your circumstances change, you have crossed the threshold. When you solve a concern and a new concern rises to take its place without any real change in your situation, you are no longer preparing. You are circling. The loop is closed. The loop has become the destination. David is still circling, not because he lacks intelligence, not because the opportunity is gone, parts of it remain, but because the habit of almost ready has calcified into an identity. He is the person who is about to start. That identity is comfortable in ways that being actually started is not. Actually started means you can fail. Almost ready means you have not failed yet. But it also means you have not begun. There is a tide metaphor worth living with here. A tide that lifts all boats is powerful. But if your boat is still on dry land when the tide comes in, the tide does not find you. The water moves around you. The other boats rise. Yours does not. Timing is not about predicting when the tide will arrive. Timing is about having your boat in the water before the water moves. Getting into the water is an act of commitment, not an act of complete readiness. In a later section, you will run into an idea about risk that runs straight against the usual belief. After that really registers, it changes how you calculate every decision going forward. But right now, what matters is this. The readiness you are waiting for is a moving target. It was engineered by the most well-intentioned part of your psychology to keep you from the discomfort of exposure. It will keep moving. It will always have one more condition. The condition will always feel legitimate, and the window will quietly do what windows do, eventually close, regardless of whether you are standing at it. David is not a cautionary tale because he failed. David is a cautionary tale because he never found out whether he would fail or succeed. That not knowing is the actual cost of the readiness trap. Not failure, not loss. Permanent uncertainty in place of a life actually lived. You do not need to be fully ready. You need to be ready enough to begin. And honest enough to tell the difference between those two things. The readiness you have right now, whatever it is enough to take the first committed step. The question is not whether you will be more ready in 6 months. You probably will be. The question is whether the window will be equally open in 6 months. If you cannot answer that with certainty, the asymmetry is already pointing you in one direction. What is the first step you have been labeling as too early? Chapter 3. The window was never waiting for you. Saving more money is not how most first-generation wealth gets built. That sounds like advice designed to keep you small. It is not. It is the single most important pattern hiding inside every major wealth explosion in modern economic history. Once you see the pattern, you will never read a financial news story the same way again. Here is what the data actually shows. The people who built wealth fast, the ones who moved from nothing to something in under a decade, were almost never the most disciplined savers in the room. They were the people who recognized a specific kind of economic moment. They moved through it before everyone else realized the door was open. The discipline came later. The recognition came first. So before you answer that question from the last chapter, the one about what step you have been labeling as too early, understand this. The timing of that step matters in a way most financial advice refuses to admit, not because patience is wrong, but because the window you are standing in right now has a shape, and that shape has been seen before. Let me show you what I mean. There is a framework built by an economic historian named Raymond Chalk, not a celebrity economist. Not someone with a best-selling book and a speaking fee. Chalk spent the better part of 3 decades cataloging what he called wealth creation windows, specific compressed periods in modern economies when more first-generation net worth got created in 5 years than in the surrounding 20. He was not interested in why rich people got richer. That story is boring and predictable. He was interested in why ordinary people, people without inheritance or credentials or industry connections, occasionally broke through in enormous numbers, and then why those same conditions vanished. His conclusion was specific enough to be useful. Every single window, without exception, shared exactly 3 identifiable features. He called them distortion, access, and compression. Not metaphors. Measurable conditions. Here is the thing about those 3 conditions. All 3 are observable. All 3 have appeared together before. And all 3 are present in the economy you are living inside today. But do not let that land too fast. Before you understand what is present, you need to understand what each one actually looked like in history. Because this pattern does not feel the way you expect it to. Think about the post-war period in the United States, 1945 to 1960. That 15-year window saw more working-class families move into genuine asset ownership than any comparable stretch before or since. If you have ever heard someone from that generation say they built everything from nothing, that is not mythology. That is the window. Housing prices were distorted by policy intervention. Veterans' loans made credit accessible to people who had no prior relationship with banks. And the compression factor, the speed at which prices corrected upward, was violent. A man named Gerald Prout bought a 3-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio, in 1947 for $4,200 on a VA loan with no money down. By 1961, that house was worth $19,000. Gerald had not become a sophisticated investor. He had stepped through an open door. Here is the part people miss. Gerald did not know the door would close. Nobody announced it. The conditions just shifted, interest rates changed, policy expired, prices normalized, and the window sealed. The people who moved early did not feel like they were moving early. They felt like they were doing the only obvious thing available to them. The people who waited for certainty were still waiting when the prices corrected. That is the first time these 3 conditions appeared together in a recognizable cluster in the modern era. It was not the last. Now consider what happened between 1994 and 2001. The internet created an access distortion unlike anything Chalk had ever cataloged before. Suddenly the cost of starting something, reaching customers, distributing value, all of it collapsed. A woman named Carla Santos had been working as a catalog designer in Phoenix. She built a mail-order craft supply business online starting in 1996. She had no technical background. She hired a 19-year-old to build her website for $700. Within 4 years, she was clearing $400,000 a year in revenue. Carla was not a visionary. She was someone who saw that the cost of entry had dropped to near zero before most people around her noticed. What was the distortion in that window? The gap between what the internet could do and what mainstream commerce had adapted to was enormous. Prices for customer acquisition were almost nothing. Attention was cheap. Tools were crude but accessible. The compression was brutal. By 2001, the window had largely normalized. The easy traffic was gone. The cheap ad space was gone. The naive consumer was gone. The people who built real businesses between 1996 and 2000 rode a tide that lifted everything. The people who started in 2002 had to actually be good. This is where 𝗏𝗧𝗧's framework gets sharp enough to cut something. The window is not created by the technology or the policy or the moment itself. The window is created by the gap between what is newly possible and what the majority has not yet acted on. That gap is always temporary. It closes not when everyone fails, but when enough people succeed that the advantage disappears. In other words, the window closes because it worked. Think about that for a second. The window closes because it worked. Which means the window is always most powerful in the period before most people believe it is real. Now the third example. This one is close enough that you might have missed it entirely. March 2009 to December 2012. Residential real estate in dozens of American markets was priced 30, 40, sometimes 60% below replacement value. 𝗏𝗧𝗧 identified this as one of the most compressed access windows he had ever documented. Ordinary people, not hedge funds, not institutional buyers, not Wall Street, ordinary people with modest liquidity could acquire income-producing assets at prices that had not been available since the 1970s. A teacher named Marcus Webb in Memphis bought a duplex in August 2009 for $78,000. It had rented for a combined $1,800 a month the year before the crash. He paid $1,400 down, used an FHA loan, and had positive cash flow from month one. By 2015, the property was worth $160,000. Marcus owned 3 more by then: distortion, access, compression. The distortion was the gap between actual property value and the panic-driven asking price. The access was the government-backed loan programs keeping entry costs low. The compression was how fast institutional money arrived. By 2013, private equity had flooded those same markets, and the window had mostly sealed. Marcus moved in 2009 not because he was fearless. He moved because he ran the numbers, and the numbers told him something that felt almost too good to be true. The people who waited for confidence ended up watching someone else buy their opportunity. Now stop for a moment. Go back to the life you were living at that exact point 3 years earlier. Think about what you were watching, what felt uncertain, what felt like it was not quite the right time yet. Is it possible that inside that period of hesitation, a door was already open? Not wide open, not obvious, but measurably open. This is not a question designed to create regret. Regret is useless and expensive. This is a question designed to calibrate your pattern recognition. Because the next time you feel that same uncertain hesitation, you need to be able to tell the difference between genuine danger and the familiar fear of an unfamiliar opening. Here is what 𝗏𝗧𝗧 observed about how people feel when they are standing inside a window. They almost never feel lucky. They feel nervous. They feel like they might be wrong. They feel like they are doing something that other smart people around them have not done, and that feeling is uncomfortable. The confidence comes afterward. The clarity comes afterward. The people who moved did not move because they were certain. They moved because they had a framework that made the uncertainty navigable. And this is where 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗘's three conditions become your code. Distortion means a gap exists between the real value of something and the price the market has assigned to it. You are looking for a mismatch that has a reason, policy, technology, fear, friction, not just a wishful one. Access means that gap can actually be entered by someone without existing capital or connections at your level. If the distortion is real but only reachable by people with $1 million already, the window is not open for you. You need an access condition. Compression means the gap is narrowing. This is the pressure dial. The window is not indefinite. People are waking up to the distortion. Smart money is already moving. The compression is what makes speed necessary, not panic, but real, deliberate speed. 3 conditions. You do not need all of them at full intensity. You need all 3 to be measurably present. Before long, you will run into an idea about the right way to enter a wealth window that runs straight against the usual belief, specifically about whether preparation or speed is the more valuable resource. Once that becomes real to you, it changes the order in which you act. For now, hold this. Every window in history that built first-generation wealth at scale had a moment when it looked like a bad time to enter. The post-war moment looked uncertain. The early internet looked like a fad. The 2009 real estate market looked like a trap. The people who built real wealth inside each of those windows were not the ones with the most confidence. They were the ones who had learned to read the 3 conditions clearly enough that the uncertainty became navigable rather than paralyzing. You were asking what step you have been labeling as too early. Here is the more precise question. Does the step you have been holding back require distortion, access, and compression to be present? And have you actually checked whether all 3 are? Not assumed. Checked. Because the window is not waiting for you to feel ready. The question is whether you can rate it before it reads you. Chapter 4. Why First-Generation Millionaires Move Differently. The money you did not make this week is not neutral. It is not simply absent. It is working against you in ways that do not announce themselves. Quietly. Systematically. Right now. Every week you spend running the same patterns, waiting for the right signal before you commit. The gap between where you are and where you need to be is not staying still. It is widening, not because you are failing. Because the window you are standing in front of has a cost attached to it that most people never calculate, the cost of watching it without moving. That invisible arithmetic is what this chapter is about. And more importantly, it is about the people who looked at the exact same window you are looking at right now and did something so counterintuitive, so different from what they were told to do, that it changed the entire shape of their financial lives. The question is not whether they were luckier than you. The question is how they thought. That is the answer this chapter is going to give you. Reading the market is one thing. That was already there as the last chapter ended. The question is whether you can read it before it reads you. But here is what nobody tells you about that question. Reading is not enough. The people who profited from every major economic window in the last 20 years did not simply read it better than everyone else. They moved differently the moment they saw it. And that difference in movement, that specific behavioral fingerprint, is what separates the first-generation millionaire from the person who watched the same window close from the outside. Here is an open question. Hold it while this chapter builds. What is the actual mechanism inside a person that allows them to commit fully when everyone around them is still debating? Remember the life you were living at that exact point 3 years earlier. Not vaguely, specifically. What were you earning? What were you spending your energy on? What were you waiting for? 3 years is not a long time, but it is exactly long enough for some people to go from ordinary income to financial independence, not through inheritance, not through an extraordinary stroke of luck, through a very specific sequence of decisions made inside a window of time that was available to everyone, but entered by almost no one. That gap between availability and entry is the entire story of first-generation wealth. Her name was Priya. She was 29 years old, living in a 2-bedroom apartment she shared with a roommate in a mid-sized city, working a project management job that paid her $52,000 a year. She was not miserable. She was competent, respected, and completely stuck. Not the kind of stuck where you feel the walls, the kind where you have quietly accepted the ceiling. In 2021, Priya started noticing something. The freelance digital operations market was fragmenting. Companies that had entire in-house teams managing their online infrastructure before the pandemic were now outsourcing piece by piece. And the coordination layer between those pieces, the person or small team who made the fragmented parts run as a whole, was being handled badly almost everywhere she looked. There was a gap. She could see it clearly. She had the skill set for it. She knew at least a dozen companies through her existing network who were actively losing money because nobody was filling that role. She also had $17,000 saved. This is where most people negotiate with themselves into paralysis. And Priya knew that instinct was rising in her. She felt it. The calculation that says, wait until you have more capital, wait until you have a client committed in writing, wait until you have spoken to a lawyer, wait until your circumstances are more favorable. She recognized that voice. And she made one decision that changed everything. She refused to let that voice set the timeline. She did not quit her job impulsively. She spent 3 weeks, not 3 months, 3 weeks, identifying the one client in her network with the most urgent problem and the most immediate budget. Not the biggest company, the most urgent one. She made a proposal. They said yes within 48 hours. She gave notice the following Monday. 18 months later, Priya had cleared $1 million in revenue. She retained roughly $340,000 as net personal income after expenses and taxes. She invested $200,000 into a diversified index position and a small stake in a colleague's product company. She built a client base of 11 businesses, 4 of which came to her through referrals she never had to chase. She did not do this by being smarter than everyone. She did it through a sequence that, when you examine it precisely, reveals the exact mechanism this chapter is built to deliver. Do not miss this. Priya did not optimize. She concentrated. There is a difference so fundamental that it changes everything, and almost every piece of financial advice you have ever received has gotten this backwards. Optimizing means spreading your attention across multiple opportunities and trying to extract a reasonable return from each one. It sounds logical. It sounds careful. It sounds like the behavior of a rational person managing risk. What it actually does is divide your force at the moment when concentration is the only thing that works. Every major first-generation wealth event in the last 2 decades, from service businesses to digital products to market-timed investing to content-driven commerce, was created by someone who picked one window and went through it entirely before looking for the next one. Priya saw one gap. She did not hedge it with a side project. She did not build a personal brand simultaneously. She did not keep her options open. She concentrated every unit of her available time, attention, social capital, and savings on that one entry point. And she moved before the window had time to become obvious to the wider market, Because here is what happens when a window becomes obvious. It closes. Not immediately. Gradually, then completely. By the time a wealth opportunity is visible to most people, the early extractors are already banking their second year of profit. The people who arrived late are competing against the people who arrived first, and competing is expensive. Concentrating early is the entire mechanism. Everything else is downstream of that one move. There is a name for the reflex that stops most people from concentrating. It is not laziness. It is not cowardice. It is what researchers call premature optimization, the instinct to keep gathering information past the point where more information adds value, because gathering feels like progress and committing feels like risk. You probably know this reflex personally. You have felt it. The moment when you have enough to move and something in you says, "Not quite yet, one more signal, one more data point, one more confirmation." That reflex is not protecting you. It is costing you. And here is what makes it so difficult. The reflex is not entirely wrong. Patience and information gathering are genuine virtues in the right context. The problem is that a wealth window is not the right context. A wealth window is a timed entry. When the tide is rising for a specific category of opportunity, patience becomes passivity. And passivity looks virtuous from the inside while the window closes around you. This is not the same as recklessness. Priya was not reckless. She gathered exactly enough information to identify the specific entry point with the greatest urgency and the shortest path to a closed contract. Then she stopped gathering and started moving. The line between enough information and too much is not fixed. It moves based on how fast the window is closing. First-generation millionaires are people who have trained themselves to feel that line and cross it before they feel fully ready. You will notice something about every person who built their first million without inherited capital. They are almost never the most qualified person in the room. Priya was not the most experienced digital operations specialist in her city. She was not even in the top 10, but she was the most decisive person looking at that specific gap in that specific moment. Decisiveness is not a personality trait you either have or do not have. It is a skill that develops when you understand what the alternative actually costs. Here is what the alternative costs. Every week spent at the threshold of an opportunity rather than inside it is a week the market is learning your opportunity exists. Every week the market learns. New entrants arrive. Every new entrant compresses the margin available to the next person who enters. You are not waiting in a frozen room. You are waiting in a room where the walls are moving. Now close the open question from earlier in this chapter. What is the actual mechanism inside a person that allows them to commit fully when everyone around them is still debating? It is not courage in the dramatic sense. It is not a special appetite for risk. It is this. A first-generation millionaire has a more accurate understanding of what doing nothing costs. Most people calculate the risk of moving and compare it against a baseline of staying still, as if staying still were free. It is not free. Staying still inside a closing window has a price that compounds daily. And once you have genuinely internalized that arithmetic, not heard it, internalized it, the calculus changes. Moving stops feeling like a leap. It starts feeling like the only rational option available. Priya did not feel brave when she handed in her notice. She felt like she was doing arithmetic. That is the behavioral fingerprint, not audacity, not a different psychology. A different calculation made more honestly with the cost of inaction included. Down the line in this book, you will run into an idea about risk, and when the contradiction resolves, It will change the specific kinds of decisions you are willing to make that run straight against the usual belief. For now, carry this forward. The window does not care how prepared you feel. It only cares when you enter. The question waiting in the next chapter is not whether to move, it is precisely where to stand when you do. Chapter 5. The 3 assets the window is currently amplifying. Picking the right moment but the wrong vehicle is still a loss. That should not need to be said. But it does, because most people who finally wake up to a wealth window spend all their energy on timing and almost none on positioning. They see the tide coming in and they stand on a patch of sand that goes underwater no matter what the tide does. The window this book has been describing is real. It is open right now, and it will close, but the window does not reward everyone who notices it. It rewards specifically those who place themselves in the path of the 3 forces. This economic moment is actively amplifying. Everything else, no matter how hard you work it, no matter how early you rise, will return you something close to nothing compared to what those 3 forces can do when you align with them directly. That is the truth this chapter is going to make you see clearly before you take another step. Here is the open question you should carry through the next several minutes of listening. You will hear about 3 asset types. But buried inside the explanation of the third one is a distinction that most people miss. A line so thin that 2 people can invest in what looks like the exact same thing and end up on completely different sides of a decade. Hold that question. The answer will come. First, you need to understand what amplification actually means in economic terms. The word sounds promising and vague at the same time. Amplification does not mean a rising market. It does not mean a trend that is going up. It means that the structural forces at play right now, the specific combination of interest rate realities, technological compression, demographic shifts, and capital redistribution, are hitting certain asset categories with a multiplier that does not exist in neutral economic periods. A normal decade rewards patience and diversification. This window rewards concentration and speed. Those are not the same thing. Knowing which decade you are living in changes every decision. Look back at the person you were at that exact point 3 years earlier. Not in terms of money, but in terms of what you understood about how money actually moves. Most people at 22 or 25 or even 28 have a model of wealth that was handed to them by people who built it in a different era. Steady job, slow savings, maybe a mutual fund. That model worked when the machinery of the economy was running at a certain pace. But the machinery changed. The people who noticed it changed and repositioned in the years between then and now. They are not 3 years ahead of you. Some of them are 10 years ahead of you in net worth terms, even though only 3 calendar years passed. That gap is not fate, but it is the cost of using yesterday's map in today's terrain. The first asset the window is amplifying is attention-backed digital distribution. Not technology in the abstract, not apps or crypto or the word digital used as a general gesture at the future. Specifically, the capacity to create a repeatable information or entertainment asset that accumulates audience without requiring your physical presence each time it runs. The economic logic is this. In a period when capital is concentrated but consumer spending is fragmented, the businesses that win are the ones that can reach thousands of specific people with near zero marginal cost per additional viewer, reader, or listener. A physical business adds a cost for every new customer it serves. A well-built digital distribution asset does not. The window amplifies this because the platforms that carry these assets are still in a competitive phase. They are still incentivizing creators and publishers with organic reach that will not last indefinitely. This is not forever. It is now. Consider a woman named 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘. She spent 4 years working in insurance claims processing, doing the same competency-heavy analytical work every day for a salary that went up about 3% annually. In the evenings, she started recording short audio explanations of financial concepts for people with no financial background, the exact audience she had grown up inside. She did not go viral. She did not get famous. But 18 months in, she had built a library of 300 pieces of content that were being discovered every week by new listeners who trusted her precisely because she had been in their situation. She licensed a short course to a professional development platform. Then another. Then she started consulting for 1 day per month at a rate that equaled her weekly salary. The content did not do this for her all at once. It accumulated. And accumulated assets behave differently from income that resets to zero every Friday. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 did not quit her job on a dream. She built a second machine while the first one was still running. Notice what happened in that story. The asset 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 built was not technology. It was trust at scale. The technology was just the pipe it traveled through. The second asset the window is amplifying is cash-flowing property in overlooked markets, not the glamorous coastal markets, not the cities that appear on every top 10 list that circulates in entrepreneurial podcasts. The overlooked markets, secondary cities, aging suburbs with new employer bases moving in, rural corridors where remote work has shifted population flows. Here is why this window specifically rewards this category. When interest rates rise and broad credit tightens, first-time buyers get squeezed out of major markets. They move to smaller ones. Rents in those smaller markets firm up. The investors who were already positioned there before the migration arrived, they are now sitting on assets with stronger demand, stronger yield, and lower competition than they had 2 years ago. The window amplified their position without them doing anything additional except having chosen correctly in the first place. You do not need to own a dozen properties to feel this effect. One unit, carefully chosen in the right market, with the numbers running positive from the first month, does something specific to your psychology that no investment account can replicate. It makes the concept of monthly income that does not require your labor real in a physical, tangible way. And once that reality lands in your body, not in your head, in your body, your relationship to time and labor changes permanently. You stop renting your hours as your only option. You understand that you are building something separate from you, something that can keep running while you sleep. The challenge with this category is exactly the thin line mentioned earlier. 2 people can buy property in the same zip code in the same year at similar prices. One chooses a unit with structural demand near a hospital, a distribution center, a university, and holds it through 5 years of compounding rent and equity. The other chooses based on the feeling of a neighborhood, buys something that needs work they underestimated, and sells at a small loss after 2 years of exhaustion. Same asset class, completely different outcome. The window does not protect you from bad positioning inside the category. It rewards the people who did the pattern matching work before they placed the bet, which brings you to the third asset. And this is the one where the thin line most people miss becomes visible. The third asset the window is amplifying is asymmetric personal skill, not credentials, not degrees or certifications as status signals. Specific, rare, legible skills that sit at the intersection of high demand and low supply, and that are currently being underpriced because the people who have them do not know how to communicate their value clearly. copywriting for regulated industries, supply chain analysis for mid-size manufacturers, financial modeling for small business owners who have never had a CFO, operational systems designed for service businesses trying to scale. These skills sound specialized because they are. And because they command prices that feel disproportionate to the number of hours involved. Here is why this window amplifies them specifically. The same technological compression that makes digital distribution cheap is also eliminating the generalist middle. Companies that once hired 5 moderately skilled employees to fill a function now hire 1 exceptionally skilled contractor and a software tool. That 1 contractor, if they are you, earns more than the 5 combined. The window is not just open for entrepreneurs. It is open for the highly skilled individual who has stopped trading hours for a fixed salary and started charging for outcomes. That reframe from hours to outcomes is where the multiplication begins. But here is the thin line. 2 people both decide to sell a skill as a freelancer. One picks a skill that is broadly in demand and broadly available: basic social media management, general writing, entry-level design. The other picks something that requires a specific background, serves a specific business problem, and produces a result the client can measure in dollars. The first person builds a treadmill. More work, same rate, ceiling everywhere. The second person builds leverage. Each client creates a result that is citable. That citation raises the rate. The raised rate attracts clients who expect higher results, which forces the skill to deepen further. The compound effect in that direction is not gradual. It accelerates. Late in this book, you will encounter something that directly contradicts what most people believe about the speed of skill monetization. When that idea snaps into focus, it changes how quickly you decide to act. Now, the self-audit this chapter requires of you is direct. Sit with 3 questions, 1 for each asset. For attention-backed distribution, do you already have a body of knowledge or experience that a specific underserved audience would find valuable? If so, what is the single format through which you could begin making it repeatable this week? For overlooked property, have you run the actual numbers on one specific market within 3 hours of where you live? Not as a fantasy exercise, but as a real underwriting, purchase price, estimated rent, operating costs, net cash flow on day 1. For asymmetric skill, what is the one thing you can do better than 80% of the working population? And are you currently being paid for the outcome it produces, or merely for the hours you spend producing it? Most people will move past those questions quickly. That is exactly what the window will penalize. The people who pause, who actually answer, even badly, even incompletely, are the ones who start building orientation. Orientation precedes positioning. Positioning precedes the result. The window is not amplifying people who are informed. The window is amplifying people who are placed. Chapter 6. Speed is the only unfair advantage left. Right now, while you are listening to this, money is moving. Not toward you, not away from you on purpose, just moving fast sideways quietly to whoever was already standing in the right spot when it started flowing. Here is what that costs you, not in some theoretical future. Today, the income gap between someone who acted on a real opportunity 6 months ago and someone who is still researching that same opportunity is not 1 month's difference. It is compounding. Every week of deliberation adds another week of distance between you and the person who moved first. The mechanism causing this is invisible. That is why it is so damaging. It is not your intelligence. It is not your work ethic. It is a belief, quiet, reasonable sounding, deeply wrong, that careful deliberation is the same thing as good strategy. This chapter is about why that belief is costing you exactly what you're trying to build, and what you need to replace it with. The last chapter ended with a hard truth. The window is not amplifying people who are informed. It is amplifying people who are placed. Placement sounds like luck. It sounds like the right family, the right city, the right last name, and sometimes it is. But placement is also something else entirely. Placement is the result of someone who stopped waiting and started moving before the conditions were perfect, before the plan was complete, before the fear had quieted down. They moved, and the moving placed them. That is the distinction that matters here. Placement is not something that happens to you first and then allows you to act. Placement is what happens because you acted. This chapter starts with a question it refuses to rush. You have probably met two kinds of people in your life: the ones who always seem to catch the wave, and the ones who always seem to arrive at the beach just after the wave broke. Same beach, same water, same opportunity, technically speaking. What is actually different between them? Hold that question. The answer is not what most people think it is. Return to the person you were at that exact point 3 years earlier. Seriously, stop and think about it. What did you almost do? What opportunity sat in your inbox, in a conversation, in a decision you delayed until it made itself for you by expiring? What would your financial situation look like today if you had moved on that thing within 72 hours instead of waiting 3 weeks to decide? That gap between the version of you who moved and the version who waited, that gap is the subject of this chapter, not the opportunity itself. The gap. Speed is not recklessness. That is the first misunderstanding to clear away. Speed is not acting without information. It is acting with the minimum viable amount of information at the maximum useful moment. Those are two completely different postures. Confusing them is one of the most expensive intellectual mistakes a person in a compressed window can make. The careful, patient, research everything approach works beautifully in a slow economy with a long runway. In a window this compressed, that same approach is a liability dressed up as wisdom. Consider a man named Marcus. Marcus was 31, working in logistics, and had been watching a particular niche in resale for 14 months. He had a spreadsheet. He had a competitor analysis. He had a 6-page business plan with 3 different financial projections. He had a friend who had offered him a mentorship slot in January. Marcus declined because he was not quite ready. By April, that friend had filled the slot with someone else. By June, the market Marcus had been analyzing had moved past the entry point he had been targeting. His spreadsheet was accurate. His timing was flawless in the sense that he had waited flawlessly. He never lost money. He just never made any either. The window moved without him. The lesson does not announce itself right after a story like that. It settles. Let it settle. Now hold Marcus next to someone you have heard about before. Back in chapter 2, you met David. David made a decision with 60% of the information he wanted. He moved before he felt ready. He built a small revenue stream inside a window before he fully understood the window. In chapter 4, you met Priya. Priya had a nearly identical opportunity to David's. Same platform, similar product category, similar starting capital. By every external measure, their starting lines were the same. But here is what was different. David treated his first move as a sprint. Priya treated hers as a marathon, not consciously. Priya was not being slow on purpose. She was being thorough, which in most contexts is a virtue. But in a sprint, the runner who paces for a marathon loses, not because they are weaker, because they are using the wrong strategy for the terrain. Priya spent 6 weeks refining her product listing before launching. David launched in 4 days and refined based on real customer responses. 6 weeks into Priya's launch preparation, David had already completed 2 full cycles of test, learn, adjust. He had real data. She had a more polished hypothesis. By week 8, David's imperfect product with real traction was outperforming Priya's refined product in its first week. By month 4, the gap between them was not closable by quality improvements alone. David had velocity. Priya had polish. In a window, velocity compounds in ways that polish simply does not. Here is what makes this painful to hear. Priya was smarter about the product. Her listing was genuinely better written. Her research was more thorough. If this had been a slow market with a 2-year runway, Priya's approach might have built something more durable. But the window does not reward the best product. The window rewards the best-placed product at the moment the current is strongest. That is the revelation. The window punishes perfection-seeking and rewards fast, imperfect action compounded over short cycles. Say that again in your own head. Not because it is a slogan, but because you need to locate where it contradicts something you were taught. You were probably taught that quality beats speed. That slow and steady wins. That waiting for the right moment is discipline. And in some contexts, in some economic periods, that is completely true. But this is not that period. A strategy built for a different terrain will strand you on this one, no matter how faithfully you execute it. What does fast, imperfect action compounded over short cycles actually look like? It looks like deciding in 48 hours instead of 14 days. It looks like launching with 70% of the features you wanted instead of holding for 100. It looks like sending the proposal before you have rehearsed it a 5th time. It looks like beginning and correcting in motion rather than correcting before beginning. The errors you make moving fast are real. They cost something. But they cost less than the compounding gap created by standing still while the market moves beneath you. Now let us go back to the question you were asked to hold. The 2 kinds of people, the wave catchers and the ones who arrive just after. What is different? It is not knowledge. It is not resources, at least not primarily. It is response latency, the time between seeing an opportunity and acting on it. Wave catchers have shorter response latency than almost everyone around them. Not because they are braver, although sometimes that is part of it. Because they have deliberately trained themselves to distrust the voice that says wait until this is cleaner, wait until you know more, wait until the fear settles down. They have learned through repetition that the cost of moving on imperfect information is almost always lower than the cost of not moving at all. Over time, that trained response becomes reflexive. It becomes the thing that places them exactly where the wave arrives. Response latency is trainable. That is the part no one tells you. You are not born a fast mover or a slow one. You have been conditioned by education, by family, by 100 small experiences, to associate deliberation with intelligence and speed with recklessness. Unlearning that association is not a personality change. It is a skill acquisition. Like any skill, it is built through repetition in low-stakes environments until it becomes automatic in high-stakes ones. Start with the small decisions. The email you have been drafting for 3 days, send it today. The conversation you have been postponing, have it this week. Not because those specific things will make you rich, because each one is a repetition in shortening your response latency. And shortened response latency is the mechanism that will place you correctly when the actual high-stakes moment appears. A little later, we will get to a point about patience that runs straight against the usual belief. When you see that contradiction resolved, You will understand why the people who appear the most patient are often the fastest movers in the room. Speed inside a window is not about urgency for its own sake. It is about understanding that cycles exist. That window's open and that window's close. The tide lifts all boats, but only the ones already in the water. You cannot wade in once the tide is pulling back and expect the same lift that came to the ones who were floating before the swell arrived. The window is active right now. The current is moving. The question is not whether you have the best boat. The question is whether your boat is wet. Marcus and his 14-month spreadsheet had a better boat than most. He just never put it in the water, and the window could not save him from that. Placement is not luck. Placement is the reward for shortened response latency applied consistently over time. David was placed because he moved. Priya arrived almost in time. You still have the chance to be the one who moved. There is one thing left to decide. Are you running a sprint or a marathon right now? Because if the window is the terrain, the answer determines everything. Chapter 7. Your network is either a ladder or an anchor. The answer to most wealth questions is not a strategy. It is a person. That sounds like the kind of advice you dismiss because it feels too simple to be real. But here is what the data from every major wealth study in the last 40 years quietly confirms. Proximity to people already operating at the level you want to reach does more for your financial trajectory than almost any skill you could spend years developing alone. You have been told to sharpen your craft, build your discipline, save your percentages. Nobody sat you down and said, plainly, that the single fastest variable you can change is who you are physically and digitally near. That is what this chapter is about. Here is the question that will sit with you until we answer it together. Why do two people with nearly identical skills in nearly identical cities working nearly identical hours end up 5 years apart in net worth? Hold that question. The answer is coming, but you need to feel the full weight of the gap first. The terrain has already been named. The window is open. Now the answer is the thing, and the answer more often than not has a face. Picture the person you were at that exact point 3 years earlier. Not abstractly, specifically. Who were you eating lunch with? Who were you texting when something good happened? Who were you calling when you needed advice? Write a name in your mind right now. Picture that person. Now ask yourself honestly, when you imagined your future back then, did it look like their future? Because it almost certainly did. Not because you lacked vision, because proximity is not metaphorical, it is biological. Your nervous system reads the room you are in and calibrates what is possible based on the evidence around it. And if the evidence around you was people earning $60,000 a year with no plans to change that, your nervous system filed that as the ceiling. This is not a character flaw. It is a design feature being used against you. Here is a name, Marcus. Marcus was 26 when this story begins. He was doing freelance video editing out of a one-bedroom apartment, pulling in around $43,000 a year when the work was steady. He was talented. His work was genuinely good. He had a website, a reel, a handful of loyal small clients who paid slowly and negotiated hard. His social circle was other freelancers roughly like him, creative, underpaid, optimistic in conversation but cautious in action. They talked about rates at dinner. They complained about clients at brunch. They encouraged each other in the language of people who have not yet done the thing they are encouraging each other toward. Marcus was not stuck, but he was circling. One evening he said yes to something he almost skipped, a free industry mixer hosted by a production company he had never worked with. He went because a friend forwarded the invite and because he had nothing better to do that Thursday. He was not networking. He was showing up. At that event, he met Diana. Diana ran the content division of a mid-sized e-commerce brand doing 8 figures annually. She was not famous. She was not on any Forbes list. She was just a woman in her mid-30s who had figured out a specific thing and was very good at it. They talked for 11 minutes. She looked at his phone reel. She said she might need someone. He followed up the next morning, not aggressively, just clearly. 3 weeks later, Diana brought him in on a contract. That contract paid more in 6 weeks than his previous 6 months combined. But that was not the transformation. The transformation was what happened inside the work. Diana moved fast. She spoke to vendors, platforms, and other operators like the numbers were real and the decisions mattered right now. She introduced Marcus to her circle the way people in her position do, casually, efficiently, with a sentence that framed him as someone worth knowing. Inside 90 days, 3 of Diana's contacts had hired Marcus directly. 2 of them had referred him to someone else. His annual income that year crossed $180,000, not because he got better at editing. He was already good at editing. It was because proximity to Diana compressed 3 years of solo reputation building into 1 quarter. Her network became a current he could swim in instead of fighting the tide alone. Let that settle. Now here is what most people get wrong about that story. They hear it and immediately think about tactics. They think about how to get into mixers, how to introduce themselves, how to follow up. And those things matter, but they are downstream of the real principle. Marcus did not manufacture Diana. He positioned himself in spaces where someone like Diana might exist, and he was present and real when she showed up. That is a different thing than a script and a business card. Most people in the wrong network are not lazy. They are loyal. You have friendships that go back years. You have group chats full of people who care about you. You are not going to abandon those people, and you should not. But caring about someone and letting them set your ceiling are 2 entirely different things. You can love people and still need a different room. This is where the anchor image becomes worth examining. An anchor does not mean the people around you are bad. It means a system of comfort, familiarity, and mutual low expectation has calcified around you. And it weighs the same whether anyone intended it to or not. When you come home excited about a new idea and the room gives you 5 reasons it probably will not work, that is an anchor. When you raise your prices and the people you trust most say you are getting too big for yourself, that is an anchor. When you talk about the window that is open right now and the people around you say the economy is too uncertain and now is not the time, that is an anchor with a name you recognize. Speed matters inside a window. You do not have the luxury of the slow climb right now. Here is the truth about first-generation wealth, if that is what you are building. The people who built wealth without inheriting it almost always describe the same moment. Not a strategy, not a book, a person. Someone who was further along, who looked at them without lowering their gaze, who handed them a door they did not know existed. First-generation speed is almost always borrowed from someone else's proximity before it becomes your own. So now back to the question you have been holding. 2 people, same skills, same city, same hours. Why does one end up 5 years ahead? The answer is not talent. The answer is not luck, though luck is what it looks like from the outside. The answer is that one of them had a Diana, or became close to someone who already thought in the language of millions. That language, the way million-level operators discuss problems, move on decisions, assess risk, and talk about money, that language rewires your own thinking faster than any course ever will. Because you absorb the assumptions of the people you spend the most time with. And assumptions drive behavior. And behavior, repeated daily inside a window, determines outcome. One proximity upgrade. That is what you are looking for. Not a dozen contacts. Not a massive new network built from scratch. One person who is already operating at the level you want to reach, who sees you, who brings you into something real. That one proximity upgrade handled right, followed up on, converted into actual collaboration or mentorship or even just repeated exposure, compresses years. Here is what positioning for that upgrade actually looks like. You stop trying to impress everyone and start trying to be genuinely useful to one person who operates above your current level. You find where those people already gather: industry events, professional associations, niche online communities where real practitioners talk, not motivational spaces where people talk about success without having it. You show up consistently enough that you are recognized. You listen more than you speak. You do the thing you say you will do when you say you will do it, every single time. Because at the level you are trying to enter, unreliability is disqualifying and follow-through is rare enough to be remarkable. You do not perform desperation. Desperation is the scent that repels the people you need most. People at the level you are approaching have learned to read it fast. You come as someone building something real who would value the exchange. That is the energy that earns a door. The tide does lift all boats, but you have to get your boat into the right water first. You cannot wait for the conditions to be perfect. You cannot wait until you feel ready enough to deserve the room. The window does not negotiate with your readiness. It moves on its own calendar. The people already operating at $1 million level are moving with it right now. Some of them are accessible to you today in ways they were not 5 years ago and may not be 5 years from now. The tools of proximity, a direct message, a community, a conference, a referral from a mutual contact, these are available at a scale that did not exist for previous generations trying to do exactly what you are doing. The question is not whether the latter exists. The question is whether you are willing to step close enough to grab the first rung. Further on, we will get to a point about how to present yourself when entering a room with people further along than you that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that lands, it shifts how you show up in every conversation that matters. But for now, carry this. Your current social proximity is either compressing time or spending it. The difference between a ladder and an anchor is not who loves you. It is who raises your floor just by standing next to you. Who in your life has the power to do that right now? And have you moved toward them yet? Chapter 8. $1 Million Thinking is not bigger, it is leaner. You are losing money right now, not because you are working too little, not because you lack ambition. The loss is quieter than that. It runs deeper. Every week you spend researching 3 different business models instead of executing one is a week where your closest competitor, someone with no more talent than you, no more access, no more raw intelligence, is pulling ahead. Not because they are smarter, because they chose one direction and moved. The cost of your hesitation is not abstract. It is real revenue that does not exist yet, real momentum that has not started building, real compound returns that are not compounding, and the invisible mechanism behind all of it is not laziness. It is complexity. You have been told your whole life that bigger plans produce bigger results. This chapter is going to dismantle that idea completely and replace it with something that will feel almost too simple to trust. That question from the last chapter is still sitting with you, is it not? Who in your life has the power to move you forward right now, and have you moved toward them yet? Hold that, because what you are about to learn changes how you answer it, and changes what you do the moment this chapter ends. Here is a question that is going to seem strange at first. When was the last time a complex plan actually made you richer? Think about the plans you have built in your head, the layered ones, the ones with phase 1 and phase 2. The ones where you need to learn this first, then build that, and then eventually, once the conditions are right, you will launch. You have probably designed at least one plan like that, maybe 3. And right now, today, none of them have produced the result you needed. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern, and it belongs to almost everyone listening to this. Complexity feels like preparation. It feels responsible. It feels like the kind of serious, mature thinking that serious, mature success requires. But complexity inside a closing window is just beautifully organized delay. The window matters here. When a wave is rising, the person who paddles with one strong stroke reaches it. The person still adjusting their position when the wave crests watches it pass and disappear. The tide lifts every boat, but only the boats already on the water. Now let the open loop begin. There is something about the word simple that is going to trip you up before this chapter is done, and you need to know it is coming. Simple does not mean easy. Simple does not mean small. And simple is not the opposite of sophisticated. What it is exactly, and why it produces more money faster inside a compressed timeline, is what this chapter builds toward. Stay with it. Meet a woman named 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘. She was 29 years old, working a project management job that paid $51,000 a year, living in a mid-sized city. Every evening she was reading about 3 things she wanted to build: a digital product, a consulting practice, and an e-commerce brand. She had folders, she had notes. She had a spreadsheet with projected revenue across 5 scenarios for each of the 3 paths. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 was not confused about what she wanted. She was, as she later described it, paralyzed by her own thoroughness. One Thursday night she closed all 3 folders and made a decision that felt almost irresponsible. She picked one. Just one. Consulting, because it needed the least capital, she already had the skill, and she could reach a paying client within 30 days. She stopped reading about the other 2 entirely. Not forever, just for 1 year, 1 vehicle. 1 market, mid-sized tech companies that needed her specific operations background. 1 year to make it real. 11 months later, 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 had replaced her salary, not added to it, replaced it. Without a team, without a product, without a brand, without a single piece of the infrastructure she had spent 2 years planning to build. Sit with that for just a moment before the lesson is named. What 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 had, what made the difference, was not a better strategy. It was a narrower one. She had ruthlessly eliminated the cost of switching attention. Every time you move your focus from one business idea to another, there is a re-entry cost. Your brain has to reload the context. Your emotional energy has to recommit. Your momentum, which is a real and measurable force in building anything, resets to near zero. Multiply that re-entry cost across 12 months, across dozens of shifts in focus, and the math is brutal. You are not just moving slowly. You are actively erasing the progress you already made. This is the framework that changes things. 1 vehicle, 1 market, 1 year. 1 vehicle means 1 method of generating income. Not 3 side hustles, not 2 business models running in parallel, not a main thing and a backup thing. 1. The backup thing is a psychological escape hatch, and the moment it exists, your conviction in the main thing softens. You know it, even if you have never said it aloud. 1 market means 1 specific group of people who will pay you, not everyone who might benefit. Not a broad category like small businesses or people who want to get healthy. 1 narrow slice. one set of problems, one language. When you know exactly who you are talking to, your message sharpens to a point, and sharp things move through resistance that blunt things cannot. 1 year means committing to a timeline long enough to see real results and short enough to feel real urgency. Not someday, not until it works. 1 year, full effort, honest measurement. This is where most people push back. They say, what if I pick the wrong vehicle? What if I target the wrong market? Here is the thing you need to hear clearly. Even a slightly wrong vehicle executed with full focus will outperform the right vehicle executed with divided attention. Movement corrects direction. Stillness does not. Now, the mirror moment. Revisit the person you were at that exact point 3 years earlier. The plans you had. The version of your financial life you were building toward in your head. What was the one thing you told yourself you were finally going to do, and what happened to that thing? Not because you stopped wanting it, because somewhere between the wanting and the doing, the plan got complicated. Another idea arrived. Another option opened. Another reason emerged to wait just a little longer for a slightly better set of conditions. 3 years passed. You cannot get them back. But you are holding this right now, which means the next 3 years are still unwritten. The window that exists today in this economy at this moment, with the specific friction and the specific opportunity this particular year contains, is not going to look exactly like this again. The conditions change. The tide shifts. And the people who make real money inside a window are not the people with the most sophisticated maps. They are the people who walked through the door before someone else closed it. Here is what millionaires inside a compressed window actually do. They reduce. They say no to options that would have seemed obviously worth exploring just a year earlier. They pick the one client type that pays fastest and pursue only that client for months. They kill the product that is almost ready in order to sell the product that is already ready. Every decision runs through a single filter. Does this serve my one vehicle, my one market, my 1 year? If yes, it gets energy. If no, regardless of how interesting it is, regardless of who is offering it, it does not. This is not smaller thinking. This is leaner thinking. And lean moves at a different speed than full. A lean operation has no drag. Every dollar of attention produces more output because there is nowhere else for that attention to go. Soon, we will get to a point about persistence that runs straight against the usual belief. When that becomes clear, it shifts how you decide when to quit and when to push harder. But right now, the principle that needs to land is this one. Complexity is the enemy of speed, and speed is the only currency that matters inside a closing window. The person with the simple plan who starts this month will be further ahead by December than the person with the perfect plan who starts in spring. Every single time. Not because the simple plan is better designed, because it runs. Running plans compound. Perfect plans sit in folders. Go back to Priya for one moment. After 11 months after she had replaced her salary, a colleague asked her what her secret was. Priya thought about it. She said, I stopped giving myself options. She said it like it was almost embarrassing, like admitting something unflattering about her own discipline. But it was not a confession. It was the most precise description of what she had actually done. She had narrowed her life down to one honest bet, and she had protected that bet from the noise of everything else. Not forever. 1 year. Now, back to the question you have been carrying. Who in your life has the power to move you forward right now? The real answer, the one that matters, is the person already operating inside the vehicle you have chosen. Not someone adjacent to it. Not someone inspirational in a general sense. Someone doing the specific thing in the specific market right now, who can shorten your path by months because they already know what you are about to learn the hard way. But you can only identify that person clearly once you have chosen your one thing. Until you choose, every successful person looks equally relevant. You spread yourself across their advice the same way you spread yourself across your ideas. The focus comes first. The right person finds you faster once you are moving in a single direction. The window does not reward the well-prepared. It rewards the ones who moved. What is the one vehicle you have been circling for more than a year? And what would change if you gave it your full attention for the next 12 months with nothing held in reserve? Chapter 9. The closing signal everyone misses until it's gone. The best time to exit a wealth window is before it feels like the best time. That sounds like it was written to confuse you. It was not. It is a precise description of how economic contractions actually work. The peak never announces itself. The very conditions that feel like confirmation you should stay are the same conditions that signal the window is almost shut. You have probably heard the question from the last chapter. What vehicle have you been circling for more than a year? And what would change if you gave it everything for the next 12 months? Good. Hold that question. This chapter is not going to tell you to slow down or second-guess that commitment. What it is going to do is hand you 3 specific signals, 3 measurable, observable shifts in the environment around you that tell you when your window is entering its final phase. And it is going to show you why that final phase is the most dangerous one you will ever navigate. Not because it looks bad, because it looks extraordinary. Here is the question that will stay open for the next few minutes. Why do intelligent, informed, hardworking people consistently lose money in the very windows they correctly identified early on? Hold that. The answer is coming. Call up the person you were at that exact point 3 years earlier. Not in terms of what you owned or what your bank account said. Think about what you believed was possible for you financially. Think about how you explained your own situation to yourself late at night. For most people in their 20s and early 30s, that internal story is one of potential being deferred. I will move when conditions are better. I will invest when I have more clarity. I will commit when the moment feels undeniable. And then the window they were watching moves into its closing phase. The moment they finally feel undeniable about it is the exact moment the smart money is already heading for the door. That is not bad luck. That is the design of every single wealth window in recorded economic history. In 2007, a man named Marcus Elling owned 4 residential properties in the Phoenix metro area. He had bought his first in 2002, which was early enough to be right. By 2005, the market had rewarded him so consistently that buying his second and third felt less like risk and more like procedure. He understood the asset class. He had receipts. His rental income was covering 2 of the mortgages, and his equity position had grown beyond anything he had projected when he started. In early 2007, Marcus did something that felt rational by every standard he had used to get there. He bought his 4th property. A newer neighborhood, better finishes, stronger comps. The lender was enthusiastic. His agent told him he was buying at a natural price point. His neighbor, who had been watching Marcus do well for 5 years, asked him for advice on buying a property of their own. That last part is the detail worth sitting with. By the time Marcus's neighbor was asking for entry-level guidance, the window had already begun to close, not collapse, close, slowly, quietly, in ways that the headlines would not confirm for another 18 months. Marcus lost 2 of his 4 properties in 2009, not because he was unintelligent, not because he had made poor decisions in 2002. He lost them because he missed 3 specific signals that were visible in the environment around him in early 2007, and he did not know what he was looking at. Those 3 signals have a name now, and they show up in every window. The first signal is what you might call saturation conversation. This is the moment when the asset class or opportunity you entered early begins appearing in conversations that have nothing to do with finance. When your barber mentions it. When a family dinner includes it. When someone who has never discussed investing with you asks how they can get in. This is not a sign of widespread prosperity. It is a sign that the underlying growth has already been extracted by people who moved earlier. What remains is the surface heat, the warm glow of a fire that has already burned through its fuel. Marcus heard saturation conversation in every room he entered in 2007. He read it as validation. It was a closing signal. The second signal is effortless entry. In the early and middle phases of a wealth window, entry takes work. You have to explain what you are doing, convince lenders, navigate friction, tolerate skepticism. That friction is not an obstacle. It is the filter that keeps the window valuable. When entry becomes easy, when lenders lean forward, when approvals accelerate, when the barrier that once separated early movers from everyone else disappears, that ease is not a reward for your persistence. It is a sign that the window is flooding. Too much capital chasing the same returns compresses those returns towards zero, and often past it. In 2007, Marcus found it easier to buy his 4th property than his first. The loan officer did not ask him the questions he had been asked in 2002. He remembered feeling respected by that, almost validated. The ease was the second closing signal. The third signal is the hardest to see because it hides inside what looks like momentum. It is called extraction reversal. This is the point at which the net flow of value in a given asset class or opportunity changes direction. It stops rewarding new positions and starts feeding on them. Price appreciation continues on the surface. The numbers still look good in the spreadsheet, but the underlying engine has switched from creating wealth for participants to redistributing wealth away from latecomers to earlier holders. The people who bought in 2002 and 2003 cash out to the people who buy in 2006 and 2007. The growth was real. The extraction reversal is also real, and the two can coexist long enough to convince you that everything is still working. Now you can answer the question that was left open earlier. Why do intelligent people lose money in windows they correctly identified? Because they read the first signal as confirmation, the second signal as reward, and they never see the third signal until they are already on the wrong side of it. This is not a lesson about being cautious. Caution in the early and middle phases of a window is how you stay poor. This is a lesson about the last 20%, the stretch of time when the window looks the most inviting, when the evidence of success is most visible, when the stories are loudest and the on-ramps are widest. That final stretch is when your exits, your hedges, and your extraction plan need to be already in place, not forming, already in place. Let that sit for a second. A window does not close all at once. It narrows. The light through it becomes richer and more concentrated as the opening shrinks, and that richness is what fools you. The tide that lifts all boats does not announce when it is going out. It just goes. And the boats that were positioned to float freely sail right back to where they started, as if nothing had happened, as if all that rising was temporary from the beginning. So what does this mean for you, right now, in this specific economic moment? It means the vehicle you have been circling needs to be approached with two simultaneous disciplines running at once. The first discipline is aggressive entry. Move fast, commit fully, extract real value during the productive phase of the window. The second discipline is signal watching. Build the habit of looking for saturation conversation, effortless entry, and extraction reversal as you work inside the window, not after it closes on you. These two disciplines do not conflict. They complement each other. The person who watches for closing signals is not timid. They are operating with the kind of precision that first-generation wealth builders cannot afford to skip. When you do not come from money, you do not get the margin to learn this lesson twice. You get 1 or 2 real windows in a decade, maybe 3 in a lifetime if conditions cooperate. The difference between building something that holds and watching it dissolve in a contraction comes down to whether you saw the closing signal clearly enough to act before the window shut. Marcus eventually rebuilt. It took him until 2013, and he did it by entering a different window, multifamily residential, a market that was distressed precisely because the single-family collapse had scared capital away from everything adjacent. He moved earlier than most, before the recovery felt obvious. He told a journalist in 2015 that the thing he learned in 2007 was not to stop investing. It was to develop a sense for when a room is getting too crowded. His language was informal, but his instinct was precise. He had trained himself to feel the difference between growth and the performance of growth. You do not have time to learn the hard version of that lesson. The current window has its own version of saturation conversation already spreading into circles that were silent about this opportunity 18 months ago. Effortless entry is arriving in certain corridors faster than it should. Whether extraction reversal has begun in your specific vehicle is something only you can measure, because only you are inside it. But you need to be measuring it, not with anxiety, not with detachment, with the clear-eyed attention of someone who knows exactly what the 3 signals look like and refuses to mistake them for something else. Later on, we will get to a point about timing, specifically about when it is too late to act that runs straight against the usual belief. After that clicks, it shifts how you read every economic signal from that point forward. For now, let the chapter end with this. The closing signal is not a disaster. It is a door. And the only question that matters when you see it is whether you are facing toward it or away from it. Chapter 10. Compress the timeline without compressing the thinking. Every hour you spend moving sequentially is an hour working against the calendar. Not in theory, in compounding cost. The goal you set for 3 years from now, the income target, the savings threshold, the first serious asset is not waiting patiently for you to arrive. It is moving. Conditions shift around it. Markets reprice. Opportunities that were accessible at the start of this window become expensive, then scarce, then gone. The distance between where you are and where you need to be is not simply measured in steps. It is measured in time. And time is the one resource in this chapter that is not renewable. You are not behind because you are slow. You are behind because no one told you that the sequence you were taught, learn, then plan, then act, then refine, was designed for a stable world. This is not that world. By the end of this chapter, the way you think about executing inside a compressed window will be permanently different. Facing the door is not enough. That is where the previous chapter left you, turned toward the signal, aware of what is closing, alert to the cost of looking away. But facing a door and walking through it fast are entirely different skills. Speed without structure is just panic with momentum. What you need is not urgency alone. What you need is a different architecture for how decisions get made and how work gets done when the calendar is the enemy. Here is the question that will drive this chapter. Do not let go of it yet. If you could execute a 36-month plan in 12 months, what would have to be true about how you think? Do not answer that yet. Stay with it. Most people who try to move fast fail in a specific and predictable way. They compress the timeline by removing thinking. They cut corners on research because it feels slow. They skip the planning step because it looks like inaction. They substitute speed for depth and then wonder why their fast moves produce shallow results. Compressing the timeline the wrong way does not get you there faster. It gets you to the wrong destination faster, and that costs you more time than the original plan would have taken. Bring to mind the person you were at that exact point 3 years earlier. Seriously, pause for a moment and go back there. 3 years ago, what did you believe about how long things were supposed to take? What plans did you have that you told yourself were patient and wise? And how many of those plans still look the same today as they did then, untouched, waiting, preserved like something precious? The patience that felt like discipline 3 years ago may have simply been delay wearing a respectable name. That is not blame. That is the exact information you need right now. There is a woman named Priya who ran a small online shop selling handmade ceramic pieces. She had a 5-year plan. It was thorough. Year 1, establish the brand. Year 2, grow the following. Year 3, introduce wholesale. Year 4, hire help. Year 5, step back. It was sensible. It was sequential. And then a supplier she had been watching for 2 years suddenly offered her a contract that would have gotten her to Year 3 wholesale volume in 4 months. But only if she could respond in 2 weeks with confirmed capacity, a revised pricing structure, and a sample order ready to ship. Her 5-year plan had no mechanism for that kind of decision. It was built for a straight road. What arrived was a sharp turn. She said she needed more time to think it through. The supplier moved on. Priya arrived at Year 3 of her plan, exactly on schedule, producing exactly what she had projected. The contract she passed on had gone to someone else who was now doing 4 times her volume. Same product category, same window, different architecture. Priya was not less capable, she was less parallel. That word is the key. Parallel, not faster, not harder, parallel. Sequential thinking says, finish step 1, then begin step 2. Parallel thinking says, which parts of steps 1, 2, and 3 can run simultaneously without undermining each other. Sequential thinking protects each stage by keeping it isolated. Parallel thinking protects the goal by compressing the distance to it. The difference in output is not 20%. It is not double. In the right circumstances, it is the difference between arriving in 12 months and arriving in 36. Here is how this actually works in practice. Every significant goal you are pursuing right now has 3 categories of action inside it. There are actions that must happen before other actions can begin, genuine prerequisites. There are actions that feel like prerequisites, but are actually just habits of sequence with no logical dependency. And there are actions that can run in parallel with almost everything else. Most people treat nearly all of their actions as genuine prerequisites. They finish the website before they reach out to customers. They wait until they have savings before they study investing. They wait until they have a product before they build an audience. But examine those chains honestly, and you will find that most of the sequencing is invented. The website and the customer outreach could have started on the same day. The saving study and the saving itself could have run together. The audience and the product could have built each other. Now answer the question you have been carrying since the second paragraph. If you could execute a 36-month plan in 12 months, what would have to be true about how you think? It would have to be true that you think in parallel tracks. That is the answer. That is the full answer. The compression does not come from working harder or sleeping less. It comes from identifying which actions in your plan are genuinely sequential and which ones are just wearing the costume of sequence. This is the revelation that separates the people who hit compressed timelines from the people who burn out trying to. But knowing this principle is not enough. You need a daily mechanism that enforces it. Here is what that looks like as a working framework. Every morning before you take any action on your goal, you ask 3 questions in this exact order. First, what is the one action today that nothing else can happen without? That is your true prerequisite, your load-bearing task. It gets protected time first. Second, what are 2 actions that are currently on hold because I believe they need something to be finished first? And is that dependency actually real or just assumed? Those 2 actions, if the dependency is assumed and not real, get started today alongside the load-bearing task. Third, what is one thing I can put in motion today that I will not need to think about again for a week? That is your background track, something running in parallel that compounds without daily attention. Long-term savings automation, a scheduled content post, a supplier inquiry that just needs a follow-up in 7 days, 3 questions, 1 protected task, 2 parallelizable actions unlocked, 1 background track set in motion. That is the daily decision framework. It is not complicated. But most people will not use it because it forces a confrontation with the assumptions they have built their timeline around, and those assumptions feel load-bearing even when they are not. Call this the 3-2-1 protocol if the name helps you remember it. 1 critical path task, 2 unlocked parallel actions, 1 background track. Run that every morning for 60 days and your effective work rate does not double. It compounds, because each parallel track you start today creates leverage tomorrow. Urgency needs architecture. Say that again in your own mind. Urgency without architecture is panic. Architecture without urgency is delay wearing the name of discipline. You need both in the same room at the same time. And the 3-2-1 protocol is how they coexist without destroying each other. There is another layer to this that most tactical frameworks ignore. Compressing the timeline is not just about what you do. It is about what you decide not to re-examine. Every time you revisit a decision that is already made, you are spending time that belongs to execution. People in a compressed timeline develop a specific discipline around decision permanence. They make a decision once, they record why they made it, and they do not reopen it unless concrete new information arrives. Not doubt, not discomfort, not someone else's opinion. Actual new data. Doubt reopens decisions that were correctly made. New data reopens decisions that need updating. Those are not the same experience. Learning to tell them apart is one of the most time-preserving skills in a compressed execution window. As this book keeps moving, we will get to a point about the relationship between speed and risk that runs straight against the usual belief. Once you grasp that turn, it shifts how you actually make decisions under pressure. For now, the work is simpler than it looks. Not easy, simpler. Identify your genuine prerequisites. Unlock everything else for parallel motion. Protect your load-bearing task. Start 1 background track daily. Refuse to reopen decisions that have not been changed by new evidence. And keep moving through parallel tracks the way a current moves through water, not waiting for the bank on one side to clear before touching the bank on the other. The tide does lift all boats, but only the boats already in the water. The window you are inside right now does not care how thorough your sequential plan is. It only measures how much you executed while it was open. The people who get the most out of a closing window are never the ones who moved fastest in a single line. They are the ones who moved on the most fronts at once, without losing the quality of their thinking on any single front. Compression is not a sacrifice of thought. It is a multiplication of it. And the question waiting in the next chapter is this: once you are moving on parallel tracks, how do you know when to stop adding tracks and start finishing them? Chapter 11. Lock the million before the market resets. The moment you make real money is the most dangerous moment of your financial life. That sounds backwards. It sounds like the kind of thing someone says to make you distrust your own wins. It is not. It is an observation about a specific and brutal pattern, one that has swallowed people whole right at the finish line, not before it. The window that lifts you up can also strip you bare if you do not know how to hold what it hands you. Generating wealth inside a window and keeping that wealth require two entirely different sets of skills. Most people only develop the first one. They ride the tide perfectly. The water rises around them. Then the tide goes out and they are standing exactly where they started, confused, exhausted, holding nothing. The question is not just how to make the million. The question, the one this chapter will answer, is how to lock it before the market resets and takes it back. You just left the last chapter with one specific instruction ringing in your ears. You were moving on parallel tracks. You were building income streams simultaneously, pressing your advantage while the window was open. The question waiting for you was this: how do you know when to stop adding tracks and start finishing them? The answer lives inside what comes next, but first you need to understand something that almost nobody tells you. It will explain why David lost everything he built. You have heard David's name before in these pages. He was diligent. He was fast. He identified the window earlier than most people in his circle and moved into it with genuine courage. For 2 years, he ran a digital product business that scaled harder and faster than he had any right to expect. By the end of those 2 years, David had generated over $900,000 in gross revenue. He was close. He was so close to the million that he could feel it the way you feel rain before it actually falls. But David made one assumption. He assumed that generating wealth and securing wealth were the same motion, that the work of building was also the work of protecting. He kept adding tracks. He launched a coaching offer on top of his digital products. He hired a small team. He scaled his ad spend. He told himself he was pressing his advantage, and he was right up until he wasn't. The market shifted in his specific niche. A platform changed its algorithm. His ad costs doubled in 90 days. His revenue dropped by 60% in 1 quarter. And because he had reinvested almost everything back into growth, because he had never made a deliberate move to extract and insulate a portion of his earnings, the compression hit him in full. He came out of that window with less than $80,000 in liquid assets. The rest was either spent, reinvested, or gone with the change in conditions. David did not do anything stupid. That is what makes this so hard to hear. He just never stopped to lock it. Priya understood something David didn't. She understood it not because she was smarter, but because she had seen it happen once before. Her older brother had built a small importing business in the mid-2000s, ridden a wave of cheap overseas manufacturing, done well for 3 years, and then watched the margin collapse when shipping costs spiked and competitors flooded his market. He came out with almost nothing. Priya watched that and filed it somewhere deep. When her own window opened, She was building a B2B content agency during a specific, narrow period when demand for that service dramatically outpaced the supply of people who could deliver it well. She built with one hand and locked with the other. Every quarter, Priya pulled a fixed percentage of net profit out of the business and moved it somewhere it could not be easily redeployed. Not into new inventory, not into team, not into ads, into a separate account she mentally labeled done. She started with 20%. She raised it as the business grew. By the time the market started normalizing, by the time the tide that had lifted every boat in her space began to lower, she had already extracted and insulated $240,000. The business contracted. She let it contract. And when the window closed, she was standing on solid ground, not scrambling. Here is the principle under all of that, delivered plainly. Extraction is an active strategy, not a passive outcome. Most people assume that if they make enough money, some of it will naturally stay. It will not. Money in motion stays in motion. Revenue that flows through a business finds its way back out through expenses, reinvestment, lifestyle inflation, tax surprises, and a dozen other channels that all feel reasonable in the moment. You have to physically, deliberately, non-negotiably move a portion of what you earn into a different container. One with friction, one with distance, one that your operating brain cannot easily access on a Tuesday when you think you need to spend it on growth. Go back to the person you were at that exact point 3 years earlier. Think about the money that moved through your hands in that time, not your salary, all of it. Side work, bonuses, tax returns, freelance payments, small windfalls, added up loosely in your head. Now ask yourself, how much of it is still in your possession in a form you could actually use tomorrow? For most people in their 20s and early 30s, the answer is uncomfortable. Not because they wasted it, because they never locked it. It kept moving. This is the mirror moment, not to shame you, to show you the mechanism. The extraction move is not complicated, but it must be rules-based. You cannot decide each month whether to extract based on how you feel about the business's momentum. You will always find a reason to reinvest when momentum is high. You will always find a reason to hold back when momentum is uncertain. The decision must be made once and then executed without negotiation. Priya did not ask herself every quarter whether 20% was the right number. The number was set. The transfer happened. The decision was already made. Now here is the part of this chapter that will challenge you, especially if you have been building well. The instinct at the height of a window is to press. Everything is working. Returns are coming back faster than you expected. The logical move feels like doubling down, hiring faster, scaling harder. And in the early phase of a window, that instinct is correct. But there is a point, and this is what distinguishes people who come out wealthy from people who come out with good stories. There is a point at which pressing becomes the enemy of keeping. That point is different for every person and every market, but it has a signal. The signal is when the effort required to add one new dollar starts to visibly increase, when your cost per customer acquisition rises, when the referrals slow down, when you find yourself working harder for the same result, when your team is producing less per hour than they were 6 months ago. These are not signs to work harder. They are signs that the tide is beginning to normalize. This is when you shift from pressing to extracting. This is when you stop adding tracks and start finishing the ones you have. David saw all of those signals. He named them in a conversation with a friend. He described the friction he was feeling in his business with precise accuracy. And then he kept pressing anyway. Because the alternative, pulling back, protecting, accepting a smaller ceiling felt like quitting. That feeling cost him $800,000 in net wealth. Finishing a track does not mean abandoning it. It means deciding what this track has given you and moving that amount to safety before you find out what it will take back. There is a man named Randall who worked in commercial real estate in a mid-sized city. He is not famous. He is not on a podcast. He is 41 years old and he has never made more than $110,000 in a single year. But Randall hit his first million in net worth at age 38, 3 years ahead of almost everyone he went to school with. He did not do it by generating more. He did it by losing less. Every time a deal closed before he reinvested in the next one, he moved a fixed amount to an index account that he deliberately made annoying to access, a brokerage account at a separate institution with a 2-day transfer window. Small friction, big effect. He called it his lag account because it always lagged behind his ambitions by design. Over 11 years, those transfers accumulated. He barely noticed them going in. He very much noticed what they became. The mechanism is simple. The discipline is the product. In a later section, we will get to a point about when the right time to slow down is that run straight against the usual belief. When that point settles, it shifts how you act in the final stretch. Locking the million is the final competency of the window, not the most exciting one. Not the one that gets talked about in the spaces where first-generation builders compare notes. But it is the one that separates the people who changed their financial position permanently from the people who had a great few years and then rejoined the median. The window generates the opportunity. You generate the income. But extraction, deliberate, rules-based, friction-protected extraction, is what turns income into wealth. The tide lifts all boats, but when the tide goes out, only the boats that dropped anchor stay where they are. How do you know when to drop anchor? You know when the water has risen far enough that losing the next wave would still leave you changed. And the chapter waiting ahead will ask you something harder than that. Not whether you locked what you built, but whether you are willing to call it done. Chapter 12. You already missed every other window and survived. Every era has its moment. A small number of people step through a door that the rest of the world does not even notice is open. This is not mythology. It is the oldest pattern in human history, repeated across every generation without exception. The people who step through are not the brightest, not the most prepared, not the ones who had it figured out earliest. What they share is something simpler and far less discussed. They had been wrong before. They had missed before. And they stepped through anyway, carrying the weight of every earlier mistake like a set of tools they finally knew how to use. That pattern is alive right now, and it is alive in you. The question this chapter is going to answer is one you have probably been afraid to ask out loud. What if everything you missed was not failure but preparation? Calling it done is harder than it sounds. The previous chapter left you standing at the edge of a decision about when enough is locked in, when the tide has risen far enough that the next wave is no longer the one your life depends on. But before you can answer that cleanly, there is something older to settle first. Something that lives underneath the strategy and the timing and the numbers. It is the voice that says you have already waited too long. You know that voice. It shows up in the gaps between your plans and your actions. It shows up when you hear about someone your age who has already done what you are still reaching for. It sounds reasonable, which is what makes it dangerous. It does not scream at you. It just quietly catalogs every window you did not climb through, every moment you hesitated, every year that passed while the conditions were favorable and you were still getting ready. Here is the open question this chapter is going to sit with for a while before it answers. Were those missed windows losses, or were they something else entirely? Remember the person you were at that exact point 3 years earlier, not in terms of what you owned or how much you had saved. In terms of what you understood, about money, about risk, about your own patterns and the specific ways you tend to talk yourself out of things. 3 years ago, you had a version of the knowledge you carry today, but it was incomplete in ways you probably did not know were incomplete. You could not have seen the gaps because you were standing inside them. The cost of that is real. Time passed, opportunities closed, and you are here now, older, knowing more, still asking whether it is too late. It is not. But the reason it is not will surprise you. Consider a woman named 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘. She was 29 years old, working a steady logistics job in a mid-sized city, and she had watched 3 different economic moments pass her by in the span of 5 years. The first was a local real estate dip she read about in a newsletter but never acted on because she did not yet have a savings reserve. The second was a small business loan program through her city that she researched thoroughly, filled out half the application for, and then set aside because the timing felt uncertain. The third was a partnership offer from a former colleague who eventually built something worth following. 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 had passed because the risk felt too high for where she was at the time. By 32, she had a list of 3 near misses playing on a loop in her head, but the list was doing something she did not immediately recognize. Each miss had taught her one precise thing. The first taught her that liquidity had to come before opportunity, not after. The second taught her that half-finished applications are not cautious, they are just costly. The third taught her exactly what kind of partner she trusted and what kind she did not. A filter she could not have built without living through that specific disappointment. When the fourth window opened, 𝗡𝗢𝗧𝗘 moved through it in 11 days. Not because she was lucky, because she had 3 completed lessons and 1 clear filter she had earned the hard way. The window she had been preparing for was not the one she missed. It was the one that came after. What you tend to call a missed opportunity is often a completed course. The problem is that most people do not register it as a course because there was no certificate, no external validation, no moment where someone looked at them and said, "You learned something here." So the experience gets filed under regret instead of readiness. And the readiness sits unused. Every window you did not climb through taught you something specific about why. Either the money was not ready, or the information was thin, or you were not yet able to distinguish between a real opening and the feeling of urgency that sometimes mimics one. Those are not character flaws. They are calibration events. And calibration is the exact thing that lets you move faster when the window that matches your current capability appears. Here is the principle. It is worth sitting with before moving past it. Readiness is not the absence of past hesitation. Readiness is the accumulation of everything that hesitation taught you, deployed at the moment that fits it precisely. The current window fits it precisely. Not because the conditions are perfect, they are not, and conditions are never perfect. But because you have data now that you did not have before. You know what stopped you last time. You know the internal arguments that cost you 6 months of inaction. You know the moment in your own decision-making process where the fear voice gets loudest, which means you know where to push through it. That is a significant advantage. Most people never develop it because they either move too fast to notice their own patterns or too slow to face them. You have done the slower, harder work. Even when it did not feel like work, even when it felt like failure. This is the moment where that changes, not because the outside world is handing you something new, because the inside work is finally in alignment with what the outside window is offering. That alignment is rare. It does not stay open indefinitely. Before long, we will get to a point about how windows close that runs straight against the usual belief. After that really registers, it shifts how you act in the final stretch before 2026. But for now, close the loop on the question this chapter raised early. Were those missed windows losses? No. They were the price of the education you are now using for free. You paid in time and in the particular sting of watching others move while you stood still. That payment was real and it cost something. But the ledger does not only have one column. On the other side is a form of precision that only comes from experience, a knowledge of your own patterns specific enough to work with, and a readiness that has nothing to prove because it has already been tested. Every window you missed taught you exactly what to do differently. This is the one where that training pays. Chapter 13. The person who acts inside the window is already you. You have been waiting to feel ready. Not for a week, not for a month. You have been waiting long enough that the waiting itself has started to feel like preparation. You read, you research. You run the numbers in your head at night while the ceiling stays dark above you. None of that is wrong exactly. Preparation has its place. But somewhere between the first moment you felt the pull of this and right now, something shifted. The preparing stopped serving you and started protecting you. From what only you know. The question sitting with you right now is not whether you have enough information. It is whether you have been using information as a reason to delay rather than a reason to act. That question is uncomfortable. Good. Sit in it for a second. Because the answer, whatever it is for you, is the exact thing this chapter is built to address. And this is the one where that training pays. You have spent 12 chapters building something. Not a strategy, though the strategy is there. Not a system, though you have one now. What you have built is a clearer picture of the person who takes the next step. That person, the one who acts with focus inside a closing window, is not some future version of you who has more money, more confidence, and fewer doubts. That person is already inside you right now, waiting for one thing. Not permission, not certainty, just a decision. Here is the open question, and hold it close for a while. Why do some people with less information and fewer resources than you act faster and reach farther? We will get to the answer. But first, feel the weight of that question. Look back at your ordinary days at that exact point 3 years earlier. The things you told yourself you would do when the time was right. Some of those doors are still open. Some of them closed so quietly you only noticed when you tried the handle. That is not a judgment of the past. That is a description of how windows work. They do not slam shut. They ease shut. So slowly you could almost convince yourself they are still open. This window, the one this entire book has been mapping, is not easing shut yet, but it is moving. Now let's do something unusual. Let's go forward instead of back. 12 months from today, one of two things is true about you. In the first version, you are sitting in essentially the same position you are in right now. A little older, a little more tired, holding more information than you know what to do with. The window you read about, the one that opened in these particular economic conditions and stayed open just long enough, has narrowed. The people who moved early caught the tide. You watched them move. You told yourself you were still figuring it out. The cost of that version is not just money. It is the specific, grinding awareness that you knew and you waited, and the waiting cost you something real. In the second version, you moved. Not perfectly, not without fear. But you decided that the risk of regret was larger than the risk of action, and you stepped into the space where the tide was rising. 12 months from now in this version, You are not the same person who started this book. Not because the million changed you, because deciding did. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this chapter. A woman named Sonia ran a small alterations shop in a mid-sized city. She was good at her work, careful with money, and deeply afraid of doing anything that could not be undone. Her sister had been urging her for 2 years to take on a second location in a neighborhood where demand was growing faster than supply. Sonia had every piece of information she needed by month 4 of that 2-year stretch. She knew the foot traffic numbers, she knew her own margins. She had a landlord willing to hold the space, but she waited. She said she was being responsible. What she was actually doing was protecting herself from the feeling of having tried and failed publicly. In month 19, someone else opened a shop in that space. In month 24, that shop had a 6-week wait list. Sonia's story did not end in ruin. She was fine, but fine is not what she could have had. The particular sadness of her situation was not about the money. It was that she already knew how to do the thing. The skill was there. The information was there. The window was there. What was missing was the decision to become the person who walked through it. Now here is the answer to the question raised earlier. Why do some people with less act faster and reach farther? It is not because they have more courage in some permanent, built-in sense. It is because they understand something about identity that most people have backwards. They do not wait to feel like the person before they act. They act and then they become the person. The action comes first. The identity follows. This is the revelation, and it is quieter than you might expect. You do not need to become someone else to do what this window requires. You need to stop editing out the version of yourself that already knows how to move. Every time you have acted quickly and decisively in your life, there was a version of you fully capable of that. Maybe it was something small. Maybe it was something that mattered, but that version exists. You have evidence of it. What this window is asking you to do is call on that version on purpose, rather than waiting for the stakes to feel low enough that it shows up automatically. The million, if you reach it, will be a number on a screen. It will be a real and meaningful number. But the actual asset you build in the next 12 months is not stored in an account. It is stored in your nervous system. In the knowledge that you identified a window, assessed the risk clearly, and moved while the moving was possible. That knowledge does not expire when the window closes. It lives in you, and it opens every future window faster. Here is something worth sitting with right now. Not later, right now. What is the one move you have been almost ready to make? Not the whole plan, just the one move. The call you have not made, the account you have not opened, the conversation you have been putting off. There is one thing sitting in your awareness right now, and you know what it is. That one thing is the door, and you already have your hand on the handle. You came to this book because something in you recognized that time was a factor. That the conditions were not going to stay like this forever. And every chapter has been moving you toward one specific understanding. Not of the market, not of the methods, but of yourself. The person who acts inside a wealth window is not a type. It is not a personality. It is a choice you make once, and then again, until it becomes the thing you simply are. The window in Chapter 1 was described as external, something out there in the economic conditions of the world, opening and closing on a schedule you do not control. But you have felt something shifting as this book has moved forward. That shift is not an accident. Tomorrow, Chapter 14 will finish what was started, and what you will find there may quietly contradict what you thought this whole story was about. The person who acts inside the window is not waiting for the window. Chapter 14. The next window comes for the person you are now. There is a moment that appears in every era of human history, in every culture that has ever traded, built, or accumulated anything of lasting value. A moment when the old order loosens its grip just long enough for new hands to take hold. The people who reach in during that moment are not always the most prepared. They are not always the most connected, but they share one quality that separates them from everyone who watched from the outside. They understood that the moment was not waiting for them to feel ready, and neither are you. You have spent 13 chapters inside this book because something in you already knew the window was open. Now, before you close this and step back into your life, there is one final thing you need to understand. Something that changes not just what you do next, but who you are when you do it. The window everyone warned you about closing is not only outside you. It was never only outside you. That is what this chapter is about. The person who acts inside the window is not waiting for the window. Read that again with your ears, not your eyes. There is something underneath it that takes a moment to land. If you have been treating the window as a thing that exists out there, in the economy, in the market, in the timing of some external condition you have no control over, then you have been holding exactly half the picture. Half a picture is a story you cannot finish. Here is the open question that will follow you through everything that comes next. The question is this: what if the window you were told to enter before 2026 was never the real window at all? Sit with that. Do not answer it yet. Return to your ordinary days at that exact point 3 years earlier. Think about the specific version of yourself who existed then, the things you believed about money, about what was possible for someone with your exact background, your exact starting point. Think about what you thought a person like you could realistically build in a short span of time. If that version of you had been handed this book, would they have believed it? And more importantly, would they have acted? Because that gap between believing and acting is where most people spend their entire financial lives. 3 years from now, you will be looking back at the version of yourself who is listening to this right now. The only question worth asking is what they will see. Here is a story about a woman named Clara. Clara grew up in a city where nobody in her family had ever owned anything outright. Not a home, not a business, not a single asset that could not be taken away in a bad month. She got a job at 22, a better job at 25, and spent every year in between learning how money moved through the hands of the people around her. She noticed that the people who had wealth did not seem to wait for certainty before they moved. They moved first, and certainty followed. So at 28, with $4,000 saved, and a business idea that everyone she knew called risky, Clara registered the company on a Thursday afternoon. Not because conditions were perfect, because she had decided to become the kind of person who does not wait for perfect conditions. 18 months later, the business was earning more than her salary had ever been. 2 years after that, it was earning more than she had thought possible for someone from where she came from. She never found a different window than the one you have right now. She just stopped treating the window as the point. The point was the decision she made on that Thursday. The lesson is not that Clara was special. The lesson is that Clara made a specific kind of decision, and the decision created the next window before the first one finished opening. This is what first-generation wealth actually looks like from the inside. It does not look like someone who timed the market perfectly. It does not look like someone who got lucky once and held on. It looks like a person who built the internal conditions for a window to appear over and over, regardless of what the economy was doing in any given quarter. The tide lifts all boats, yes, but you have to have a boat. Boats do not appear. They are built, plank by plank, decision by decision, by the person who stopped waiting for the harbor to be calm before they started building. Now here is the answer to the question raised earlier. The window before 2026 is real. The economic conditions described throughout this book are real. The urgency is real. But the deepest truth is this: the external window was always meant to be a catalyst, not a container. It was designed to create enough pressure that you would begin. And once you begin, something changes in you that cannot be reversed. You become the person who has already started. That person does not need the same external conditions to move again. That person finds the next window because they are already moving when it opens. This is the revelation that first-generation millionaires carry and almost never say out loud. They do not wait for windows. They become the kind of person who always finds them. The difference is not discipline. It is not intelligence. It is a decision about identity, about who you are in relation to time and opportunity. Most people see a window and think, I hope I am ready when the moment is right. The person who builds first-generation wealth thinks, I will be in motion when that window arrives, and I will already be in motion when the next one does. So here is the one thing you can do today. Not tomorrow. Not after the next piece of information lands. Not after you finish preparing. Today. Choose one action, one specific, concrete action that the version of you who has already started would take. Not the version of you who is still waiting to feel ready. The version who decided. Register the account. Send the message. Make the call. Write the number down. Do the one thing that turns you from someone who read a book into someone who moved because of it. Because that move, however small it looks from where you are standing, is the moment the internal window opens. And once it opens from the inside, no external condition can close it. You have been listening to a book about a window. What you are actually holding is a decision. Make it now, and the next window is already yours.